This is a reading from the Diary of Jesus by Jean Aulagnier. Chapter 5, AD 28. The Savior, the Year of Mercy. January 4th, Tuesday. Jesus, his disciples, and Joseph left Emmaus. They headed for Arimathea. Jesus wanted to see Isaac, the shepherd. He wanted Isaac to take care of Joseph, who was rather distraught. Eventually, Isaac would also shelter Timon, the ex-chief of the synagogue of Clearwater. He had been rejected by the Sanhedrin, as we saw previously. They spent only one night in Arimathea. Jesus left Joseph with Isaac. January 5th, Wednesday. Jesus and his disciples set out for Galilee before the sun rose. First they had to make a detour through Enon, where John the Baptist preached. So, John chapter 4, verse 4, Jesus had to go by way of Samaria. Now Jesus wanted to put more disciples to work, but without hurting anyone's feelings. He told the 12, "A river gets wider as it nears the sea." Footnote 1. In other words, as Jesus grew closer to the end of his ministry, he would have to increase his waters by putting more disciples to work. Editor. I will not seek to speak in Samaria, but I will not turn down a chance to preach about God if I am asked to. John chapter 4, verse 5. So he came to a Samaritan city called Sychar, close by the plot of ground which Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Now there was a well there called Jacob's well. Jesus was tired after his journey, and so he sat down by the well. It was about noon. Jesus was leaning forward with his elbows on his knees and his hands joined. He was meditating in his favorite position. Time went by. John chapter 4, verse 7a. A Samaritan woman came to draw water. She's the one who told John about all this a few hours later. John chapter 4, verse 7b. Jesus said to her, "Give me some to drink." His disciples were away in the city at this time buying food. Then that Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, who are a Jew, ask me, a Samaritan, to give you a drink?" The Jews, you must know, have no dealings with the Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew what it is God gives, and who this is asking you for water, it would have been for you to ask him instead, and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said to him, "you have no bucket, and the well is deep. How then can you provide living water?" "Are you greater than our father Jacob? He is the one who gave us this well. He himself and his sons and his cattle have drunk out of it." Jesus answered her, "Anyone who drinks such water as this will be thirsty again afterwards, but whoever drinks the water I give him will not know thirst any more. The water I give him will be a spring of water within him that flows continually to bring him everlasting life." "Then, sir," the woman said, "give me water such as that, so that I may never be thirsty and have to come for water again." Jesus said to her, "Go home, fetch your husband, and come back here." "I have no husband," the woman answered. Jesus told her, "That is true. You have no husband. You've had 5 husbands, but the man you are living with is no husband of yours." "You have told the truth," the woman said to him. "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. It was our father's way to worship on this mountain, although you tell us that the place we ought to worship is in Jerusalem." "Believe me, woman," Jesus said to her, "the time is coming when you will not go to this mountain nor to Jerusalem to worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship knowing what it is we worship. Salvation, after all, is to come from the Jews. But the time is coming, actually it has already come, when true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. This is the kind of worshippers that the Father claims for himself. God is a spirit, so those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth." "Yes," the woman said, "I know that the Messiah, that is the Christ, is to come. When he comes, he will tell us everything." Jesus said to her, "He is speaking to you right now. I am the Messiah." At this, his disciples came up. They were surprised to find him talking to the woman, but none of them asked, "What are you doing?" or "Why are you talking to her?" And so the woman put down her water pot and went back to the city to tell the people there, "Come and see a man who has told me all the story of my life. Can this be the Christ?" So they left the city and came out to find him. Meanwhile, his disciples were urging him, "Rabbi, take some food." But he told them, I have food to eat of which you know nothing. So the disciples said to one another, Can somebody have brought him food? But Jesus said to them, My food is to do the will of him who sent me, and to accomplish the task he gave me. It is not a saying of yours. Is it not a saying of yours? It is 4 whole months before harvest comes? I tell you, lift up your eyes and look at the fields. They are white with the promise of harvest already. Footnote 2. The fields seemed white because of the sunlight reflecting off the tender green wheat shoots, which were already peeping out of the ground at that time of the year, January. The saying 4 whole months before harvest comes was based on fact, since harvest in that area usually did take place in May. The wages paid to those who reap this harvest, the crop they gather in, is eternal life, in which both sower and reaper are to rejoice together. And here the proverb fits, which is true enough: one man sows and another reaps. The harvest I have sent you to reap is one in which you bestow no labor. Others have labored, and it is their labors you have inherited. This was an allusion to their stay at Clearwater, where the disciples baptized. Meanwhile, a group of leading citizens followed the woman to see Jesus. John chapter 4, verse 39. Now many of the Samaritans from that city came to believe in him through the woman's testimony. He told me all the story of my life. And when they came out to him, the Samaritan urged him to stay with them. And he stayed there 2 days, Wednesday and Thursday. Many more of them came to believe in him through his preaching. And they told the woman, It is not through your report that we believe now. We have heard him for ourselves. And we recognize that he is indeed the Savior of the world. January 6th, Thursday. John chapter 4, verse 43a. Then, after 2 days, he departed from their town. Sychar, formerly known as formerly called Shechem, a man followed them and brought his wife over to Jesus. She was in a coma, and Jesus healed her. Jesus and his disciples finished crossing Samaria from the southwest to the northeast. They headed straight for Enon, but did not quite make it that day. They slept in a hay barn. January 7th, Friday. Jesus left by himself about 2 or 3 a.m. He visited John the Baptist to thank him for his work. He knew that his cousin was going to fall into Herod's hands again, with no hope of escaping this time. John the Baptist knew it too. Jesus blessed him in order to strengthen him in his last trial. John the Baptist would now await his destiny serenely. Jesus returned to his disciples. It was still very early in the morning when they headed for Nazareth. Mary was waiting for Jesus. She had heard how much her son was hated in Jerusalem, and she was filled with apprehension. As they walked north, Jesus taught his disciples. A few hours later he gave them leave to go. He arrived alone at his mother's house, a short while before the Sabbath rest began. Mary told Jesus what she and her sister-in-law desired, to follow him and the 12 in their journeys. January 8th to 13th. 1 year of Jesus' public ministry had gone by. He and his disciples spent a few days with their families to renew their strength. During this time, Jesus reacquainted himself with Galilee. John chapter 4, verse 44. Now Jesus himself bore witness that it is in his own country that a prophet has no honor. And when he was back in Galilee, the Galileans too made him welcome, because they had seen all the things he had done in Jerusalem at the time of the feast. They had gone up to the feast like himself. Jesus, in particular, furthered his evangelization of Naphtali. This is the region north of Capernaum, between the Sea of Galilee and the lake Hule. Footnote. See note 28 of chapter 4, editor. About this time also, Jesus' cousins were told that Susanna, the bride at the wedding in Cana, was very ill. John chapter 4, verse 46. So Jesus came once more to Cana of Galilee, where he had turned the water into wine. And there was a certain nobleman who worked for Herod Antipas, whose son was gravely ill at Capernaum. Hearing that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went to him and asked him to come down and heal his son, who was at the point of death. Jesus said to him, You must see signs and wonders happen, or you will not believe. Lord, the nobleman said to him, come down before my son dies. Go back home, Jesus told him. Your son is to live. The man put his trust in Jesus' words and began his journey home. And while he was still on his way down, his servants met him with the message that his son was still alive. So he asked what time it had been. when he grew better, and they told him, "He recovered from his fever yesterday at the 7th hour, 1 p.m." The father realized that it had happened at the very time when Jesus said to him, "Your son is to live," and he and all his household believed. Thus, for the second time, Jesus did a miracle upon his return from Judea to Galilee. Jesus also performed another miracle. He healed Susanna. Her husband, as a sign of faith, yielded to Jesus' request. He promised to allow his wife to fulfill her secret desire. From then on, she wanted to remain chaste, to consecrate herself entirely to the Lord as a disciple. Now, during this week, Jesus decided from that time on the disciples' mothers, sisters, or female relatives could consecrate themselves to him entirely. Thus, he granted his mother's desire. Footnote 4. See January 7 AD 28, page 74, editor. The women would accompany the group. This would prevent any perverted insinuations and malicious gossip whenever the Savior met women in trouble along his way. January 14th, Friday. After this short period of rest, everyone met in Bethsaida at the home of James and John's parents. Mary Salome, the mother, eagerly desired to be one of the women following Jesus. January 15th, Saturday. Jesus went on a short walk with Peter. Peter was worried because his wife did not feel ready to follow Jesus. Jesus assured him, saying that Bartholomew's wife, Judas's mother, and many others did not either. Jesus also reminded Peter that Philip's wife had to stay home with her daughters. Jesus said it was a good thing that some women stayed home, which would give him friendly homes to lodge at during his journeys. Jesus was beginning to find there was strength in his group. Jesus then told his disciples that he intended going to Caesarea. He would mix with people at the harbor, whether they were Romans or not. After all, he had recently visited with the Samaritans. January 16th, Sunday. Jesus and his disciples left Bethsaida. January 18th, Tuesday. Upon arriving in Caesarea, they headed for the pagan neighborhood. Jesus ran into a Roman he had met on October 5th in AD 27. This man, Quintilianus, considered him as a great physician and philosopher. He told Jesus that a Roman lady would like to hear him, and Jesus spoke to her about the soul. January 19th, Wednesday. Jesus healed the daughter of another Roman lady. This lady, called Valeria, was a friend of Johanna of Cusa. As we shall see, this miracle was going to have considerable consequences. Footnote 5. See January 23rd, AD 28, page 78, editor. January 21st, Friday. Jesus and his disciples came back to Nazareth. Mary brought a young Jewish girl to Jesus. Her name was Annalia, and she was from Jerusalem. Jesus had healed her, and now she wanted to consecrate herself to him totally. Jesus beamed with joy. According to our modern vocabulary, we could say she was the first nun of his church. January 22nd, Saturday. Jesus and his disciples gathered in Mary's house. The first 4 women disciples were there: Jesus' mother, Mary, Salome, Susanna, and Mary of Clopas. Martha was there too, hoping that Jesus would help her sister. Jesus described to them the role of women in his church. Grace has been concentrated in one woman, my mother. She gave birth to me so that the world may be redeemed. Women, therefore, are not disdained by God. They have become God's helpers. Through God's beloved woman, women will be able to help priests both in their own lives and in their work for the faithful. So those coming to God will always be greeted with the holy smile of one of my women disciples. The world is fearfully perverted. The world is filled with hatred, and hatred is the clearest sign that one is Satan's offspring. You will cooperate with God's servants. You shall be despised and trampled under lies, yet you'll have to go on giving love and continue smiling and pointing your finger to heaven. You alone can give others feminine tenderness. You alone can give motherly tenderness to all those of all ages being born of God. If you freely want to remain my chosen women disciples, if you have the courage to do so, you can do very much for all of humanity and for the ministers of the Lord. Women can look after the infinite miseries of the world much better than men can. Many hearts will open up to you. You will be like hostesses who welcome tired pilgrims. You shall surround them with your love, because women know how to love. Be mothers and sisters for those who will tire themselves out evangelizing. Furthermore, when it comes to suffering, you are royally superior to men. Teach men to suffer and give them support when they are afraid, discouraged, in tears, or tired. There are marvelous women who can do bold deeds to free people. None, though, are greater than women being martyred for their children, or women comforting martyrs and being like angels for the persecuted. You shall be trained after my mother's example. This will not be the first time my mother works for Christ, her Son. My cousins and my disciples already know how good Mary is at molding souls for God. My mother will be with you when I am always traveling, and I am no longer in your midst. Then Jesus spoke to Mary. Horrible spiritual lepers will crawl up to you, O Queen of the human race. They will cry out to you, have mercy, take us to your Son. And you will have to put your fair hands on their wounds and bend over ugly things that reek of hell. You will have to take those mutilated by Satan and hold them close to your heart. You will have to wash them in your tears and bring them to me. I bless your hands through which very many creatures will come to me. Finally, turning to his disciples, Jesus said, do not be so uncompromising. Learn from the kindness of women. Learn of them how to love, believe, and suffer for the Lord. Let me tell you one thing. They who are weak will become the stronger ones in faith, love, boldness, and will give up more for their master. They will do so to give me comfort and joy, looking for nothing but love in return. Then everyone went home. January 23rd, Sunday. Jesus set off on his way around the Sea of Galilee. He first spent some time with Johanna of Chuza, since she had not been able to attend the meeting on the day before. She confirmed that there were threats looming over John the Baptist. Her husband, let us recall, was Herod's steward. Herod, by the way, was not in Tiberias at this time. Johanna wanted Jesus to meet some Roman friends. Valeria, the one whose daughter Jesus had healed in Caesarea, was one of them. They arranged for a meeting 3 weeks later. January 24th, Monday. Jesus reached Gergesa on the east shore. He talked with some disciples of John the Baptist and justified his actions to them. Matthew chapter 9, verse 14. John's disciples came to him and asked, how is it that your disciples do not fast when we and the Pharisees fast so often? Jesus said to them, can you expect the men of the bridegroom's company to go mourning while the bridegroom is still with them? No, the days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them. Then they will fast. Nobody uses a piece of new cloth to patch an old cloak. The new piece would draw away threads from the old and make the rent in it worse than before. Nor is new wine put into old wineskins. If that is done, the skin burst, and there is wine spilt, and the skins spoiled. If the wine is new, it is put into fresh wineskins, and so both are kept safe. Jesus then confirmed that John the Baptist would be captured again. He also told them that they could join him when that happens. Jesus and his disciples headed for Giscala, which was near Lebanon. Jesus met Gamaliel, who was on a pilgrimage to the tomb of the great Rabbi Hillel. Jesus had met Hillel at the temple when he legally came of age at 12. Gamaliel was a wise member of the Sanhedrin, but many things weighed him down and still separated him from Jesus. February 1st, Tuesday. Jesus and the 4 fishermen pulled to shore in Capernaum at sundown. They were told that the grandson of Eli the Pharisee was dying of a snake bite. Jesus healed him, even though he knew that this would be far from enough to change Eli's heart. Eli was unwaveringly hostile to Jesus. Jesus nonetheless accepted Eli's invitation for supper on the next day. Isaac and Joseph arrived from Emmaus and met Jesus at the house of Peter's mother-in-law. The Virgin Mary and Mary Salome were staying there for the time being. Jesus told them about the people he had met and his miracle for those who believed in him. Jesus' cousin Simon said he now intended to follow Jesus. He actually wavered a lot until he definitely did follow Jesus. February 2nd, Wednesday. Jesus took only Judas along to the meal in Eli's home. Jesus knew what was in all the guests' hearts. At least he tried to give them lessons in honesty and reminded them that his kingdom was spiritual. February 3rd, Thursday. Jesus walked alone quite a distance from Capernaum in order to comfort souls in distress. He was back in time for the Sabbath. February 6th, Sunday. Jesus and his disciples were going to go through an extremely important fortnight. This period has had a great impact ever since on all of Christendom. This is how it began. Jesus and all his disciples crossed the lake. All the women came along, as well as Isaac, Joseph, and Timon, the ex-chief of the synagogue of Clearwater. A crowd also followed along in boats, so that there were a great many boats crossing the lake. The fleet came to a shore in a tiny village a little north of Magdala. Mary and Mary Salome then went home to Nazareth with Alphaeus and Jesus' cousin Simon. Susanna left for Cana. Jesus told everyone that he was going on a retreat with the 12. Then he headed west into a desolate area. He led the 12 up a steep trail between two hills and up a gorge. They saw many caves and crags, and prickly shrubs made it hard for them to walk. Jesus finally stopped and told them they were to pray by themselves for a week. Each one of them would remain in his own cave, in God's presence. They would gather together 3 times a day to pray and eat their meager rations. After this, Jesus said to them, "You will be my ministers. May God be with you." Meanwhile, Aglae, the ex-mistress from Hebron, went over to see Mary. Aglae had been listening to Jesus at Clearwater for weeks. She was always carefully veiled so as not to be recognized. She told Mary of her remorse and of her desire to repent. Mary entrusted her to Susanna. February 13th, Sunday. Jesus woke up the 12 at the crack of dawn. He woke John last. John was the only one who did not see Jesus during the time allotted for private prayer. He did not do this out of a sense of pride. John was not a proud man. He alone of the 12 now understood who Jesus was, the second person of the Trinity. As a result, he knew that Jesus was always present to him. Jesus promised John he would tell no one of John's wedding with love. Jesus had all his disciples sit around him. He said, "From now on, you no longer are just my favorite disciples. You are my apostles, the leaders of my church." After this, they set off on their way back to see those waiting for them. Matthew later described in simple words this fundamental stage of his life. Matthew chapter 10, verse 1. So he called his 12 disciples to him and gave them authority to cast out unclean spirits and to heal every kind of disease and infirmity. These are the names of the 12 apostles. First, Simon, also called Peter, then his brother Andrew, James the son of Zebedee, and his brother John, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the publican, James the son of Alphaeus, and his brother Jude, Thaddeus, Simon the Cananean, and Judas Iscariot, the traitor. Now Jesus had to go to Tiberias for a few hours. He told his apostles to meet him further west, at the foot of the mountain. This was north of the road running straight from Tiberias to the Mediterranean Sea. Jesus had to stop before that, though. A crowd of hopeful people were waiting for him on a plateau halfway up the hill. Luke chapter 6, verse 17. With them he went down and stood on a level place. A great number of his disciples were there, and a great gathering of the people from all Judea and Jerusalem and the sea coast of Tyre and Sidon. These had come there to listen to him and to be healed of their diseases. Those who were troubled by unclean spirits were also cured. The whole crowd was eager to touch him, because power went out from him and healed them all. Jesus performed a real harvest of miracles before taking leave of his apostles to go to Tiberias. Simon the Zealot and John preached for the first time. They did amazingly well. Meanwhile, Jesus was going over to Johanna's residence to meet her Roman friends. The meeting had been arranged for the end of the moon of Shevat, which fell on February 16th that year. But the women had already been waiting for 3 days. They were afraid that they would miss Jesus. Jesus knew that since he could read people's hearts. Jesus did not stay with them very long. He hurried back to see his apostles that same afternoon. The second part of this fortnight was also going to be very important. Jesus left the road and took a trail going northwest up to a mountain pass. They had a magnificent view from there. They could see the Sea of Galilee and Mount Hermon to the northeast. The snow-covered peak was also called the Horns of Hattim. Jesus gathered his apostles for the night as well as for the most faithful among his other disciples. They ate, and Jesus talked. He was going to talk for 5 days. This was the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus sat on a rock. There were about 100 people around him. Footnote 6. Later on, Jesus was going to entrust these people to the 12 who would continue his work. Jesus talked about the whims and passions of the lower self, that is, of the flesh. He said that the higher self, that is, the spirit, should dominate them. This spiritual self originates in the soul, which remembers God and the moment of its creation by God. Jesus went on to say, Matthew chapter 5, verse 13, "You are the salt of the earth. If salt loses its taste, that is what is there left to give taste to it? There is no more to be done with it, but to throw it out of doors for men to tread it underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city cannot be hidden if it is built on a mountain top. A lamp is not lighted to be put away under a bushel measure. If it is put on the lampstand, it is put on the lampstand to give light to all the people of the house. And your light must shine so brightly before men that they can see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven." Jesus explained this in further detail to the shepherds of his flock. Then they went to sleep. They simply slept in the open, since the nights were no longer cold. February 14th, Monday. Jesus waited for the crowds to climb up to the pass in the morning. Among them there were Hermas and Stephen, 2 disciples of Gamaliel. They had been deeply impressed the day before by the speeches of John and Simon the Zealot. Jesus leaned on a rock and began to preach. He spoke about God as Father. He taught on the life of the soul and God's grace. He entreated the people to hold on to their communion with God. Let us not say, "Woe unto me if I do not do this," but let us say, "Happy shall I be if I do it." Let us see the Beatitudes. They result from observing the law, just as roses grow on prickly bushes. And he told them the 9 Beatitudes, commenting them as he went along. Matthew chapter 5, verse 3. "Blessed are the poor in spirit, the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Blessed are the patient, they shall inherit the land. Blessed are those who mourn, they shall be comforted. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for holiness, they shall have their fill. Blessed are the merciful, they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the clean of heart, they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, they shall be counted the children of God. Blessed are those who suffer persecution in the cause of right, the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Blessed are you when men revile you and persecute you, and speak all manner of evil against you falsely, because of me. Be glad and light-hearted, for a rich reward awaits you in heaven. So it was, they persecuted the prophets who went before you. Jesus then sent them away until the next day. He allowed only the ill to stay, in order to heal them.